Hi guys. Tonight we're stepping quietly into a winter night from the year 1378, where a medieval castle stands beneath a furious blizzard. Imagine the snow striking the towers, the wind pressing against narrow windows, and the orange glow of firelight trembling across cold stone walls. How did people sleep here, when the world outside disappeared beneath ice and darkness? Real history tells us medieval castles were built for defence, but surviving the night required patience, preparation, and a surprising amount of teamwork. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and tell me in the comments your location and local time before you drift away with this journey. Now, dim the lights, and you step through the heavy wooden doors of the castle as the winter storm surrounds you. The first thing you notice is the sound. The castle is never completely silent, even during the deepest hours of night. Wind circles the towers, wooden beams creak softly, and distant footsteps move across uneven stone floors. You feel the cold air touching your face as guards open and close doors between different parts of the fortress. This is not a peaceful, modern bedroom with perfect temperature and soft blankets. It is a living fortress. Every corner has a purpose, and every person inside has a role in keeping the castle warm enough to endure the season. You walk deeper into the entrance hall, where the smell of burning wood mixes with damp wool clothing and stored food. The fireplace nearby gives off a gentle warmth, although the heat fades quickly against the enormous walls surrounding you. Medieval builders created thick stone structures that could resist attacks. But those same walls also held on to the cold of winter. A castle in 1378 is not simply a home, it is a small community. Nobles, soldiers, servants, craftsmen, and animals all share the same protected space. Everyone experiences the storm differently, but everyone listens to the same winter wind outside. The blizzard continues, the snow grows heavier, yet life inside continues. The people here understand that sleep is not only about comfort, sleep is about survival. Medieval castles often had large fireplaces, wooden shutters, and smaller interior rooms designed to reduce exposure to cold weather. Historians know that wealthy residents had better access to warmth and private sleeping spaces, while servants usually lived in more crowded conditions. The difference between a noble chamber and a servant corner could feel like two completely different worlds. You look toward the upper levels of the castle, imagining the rooms hidden above the great hall. Behind thick doors, a lord or the lady prepares for the night. Down below, workers finish their final tasks before searching for a place to rest. The castle slowly changes after sunset. During the day, it is a place of movement and noise. At night, it becomes a place of whispers and careful steps. The same halls that once carried conversations and activity now carry only small sounds through the darkness. You might expect medieval people to simply climb into a bed and fall asleep. The reality is more complicated. Preparing for sleep involved checking fires, arranging coverings, securing doors, and making sure animals were protected from the freezing conditions. Even the smallest details mattered. A forgotten piece of firewood could mean a colder morning. A poorly closed shutter could bring icy air into a room. A wet blanket could become a serious problem during a long winter night. Historians still argue whether medieval people commonly slept in one long period like modern sleepers, or whether some communities experienced a more interrupted pattern of nighttime rest. Written records provide clues, but ordinary sleeping habits were rarely documented by people who live simple daily lives. That uncertainty makes this forgotten night even more fascinating. You are not watching kings and battles, you are looking at a quiet moment that happened thousands of times across medieval Europe. A person removing their boots beside a fire, a servant folding a rough blanket, a guard rubbing cold hands together before returning to the tower. Small moments, ordinary moments, the moments that built history. There are also strange little details hidden in medieval life. Some castles kept small animals close to living areas because they provided warmth and companionship. A dog sleeping near a doorway was not only a protector, but also a living source of heat during cold nights. It was a practical arrangement, even if it sounds unusual today. You walk past the main hall again and notice the fading fire. The flames have become lower, but the embers still glow beneath the ash. Someone will need to tend them through the night. Medieval comfort depended on many quiet tasks that modern people rarely consider. The storm outside does not care about titles or wealth. The wind reaches every tower. The snow covers every path. But inside the castle, people create their own small world of warmth. You feel the heavy atmosphere around you. The scent of smoke lingers in the air. The stone beneath your feet remains cold. The distant voices become softer as the castle prepares for sleep. Soon most people will lie down. Some will sleep on raised beds with wool coverings. Others will rest near shared fires or in crowded rooms. Some will sleep lightly because they must wake before sunrise. The night will not be perfect, but it will be familiar. After all, humans have always searched for comfort in difficult places. A medieval castle during a blizzard may seem harsh and uncomfortable. Yet within these walls you find something deeply familiar. People laughing quietly before bed. Families staying close together. Workers sharing warmth. Guards watching over those who sleep. The castle breathes with them. The fire whispers. The storm continues. And your journey into this winter night has only just begun. You leave the entrance hall behind and move further into the castle, where the storm outside becomes louder against the ancient walls. The first lesson of this winter fortress is simple. A castle does not defeat the cold, it manages the cold. The people living here understand that stone is both a shield and a challenge. Thick walls protect them from enemies, but those same walls slowly absorb the freezing temperatures outside. During a winter blizzard in 1378, every room has its own relationship with warmth. You run your hand along the rough stone surface beside you. It feels cold and slightly damp beneath your fingers. The walls seem almost alive, carrying centuries of weather, footsteps, and quiet conversations from people who once depended on this place for protection. The castle was designed with survival in mind. Medieval builders created strong defensive structures with towers, gates, and enclosed courtyards. These features helped communities survive conflicts, but they also created spaces where people could organize daily life during difficult seasons. A winter night changes everything. The courtyard outside, normally filled with movement, is now covered with snow. The wind pushes through every opening it can find. Roofs collect white layers. Paths disappear, and the world beyond the walls becomes distant and unreachable. Inside, preparation becomes the most important activity. You notice servants carrying bundles of firewood through narrow passages. Their footsteps echo softly across the stone floor. The smell of fresh wood mixes with smoke from nearby fireplaces. Every piece of fuel represents hours of work from forests, workers, and animals that help transport supplies. Fire is precious. A large medieval castle could not heat every room equally. Fireplaces warmed important areas, but many chambers remained cold, instead of creating a perfectly warm environment. People gathered around available heat sources and adjusted their routines around them. The Great Hall became one of the most important spaces in castle life. It was not only a place for meals and gatherings during winter, it was one of the few areas where many people could share warmth. You imagine the evening slowly changing there. The noise of dinner fades, plates are removed, conversations become quieter. The flames continue moving behind the fireplace stones while the outside wind grows stronger. The castle begins its nightly transformation. The rooms that were full of activity become sleeping spaces. Benches become resting places. Corners become temporary beds. The same building that represented power during the day becomes a shelter against the darkness. Historians know that medieval castles varied greatly in design and comfort. Some were large royal residences with many rooms, while others were smaller fortified homes. The sleeping conditions of people inside depended heavily on their position. Wealth, and access to resources. A noble family might have a private chamber with a fireplace and thick curtains around the bed. A soldier might sleep in a shared room near other guards. A servant might rest wherever space allowed after completing the evening duties. The difference was enormous, yet everyone listened to the same storm. You pause near a narrow window opening. Wooden shutters block most of the wind, but tiny gaps allow cold air to enter. Outside, snow moves across the courtyard like a silent river. The moon is hidden behind thick clouds, leaving only darkness beyond the walls. It is easy to imagine medieval winter nights as endless suffering, but people adapted in practical ways. They wore layered clothing, used wool coverings, shared sleeping spaces, and arranged rooms to preserve warmth. Comfort was measured differently. A warm corner near a fire could feel luxurious. A dry blanket could feel valuable. A quiet place away from the strongest wind could feel like a gift. There is also a curious detail about medieval buildings. Some castles used wall hangings and tapestries not only for decoration, but also because heavy fabrics could help reduce drafts and make rooms feel less exposed. Historians continue discussing how much practical insulation these decorations actually provided, but they clearly had both symbolic and useful purposes. You continue through the passageways, noticing how the castle is built around movement. Small doors connect larger rooms. Stairs twist upward towards towers. Storage areas sit close to living spaces because supplies need protection during difficult weather. A blizzard is not only a problem of cold, it is a problem of access. Food must be available. Fires must continue burning. Animals must be cared for. Doors must remain secure. The castle survives because hundreds of small actions happen without anyone celebrating them. The storm demands attention. The people answer quietly. Somewhere below, workers prepare the last evening tasks. Somewhere above, a family settles into their sleeping chamber. Somewhere near the entrance, guards remain awake while snow covers the land. You begin to understand that sleeping in a medieval castle is not a single experience. It is a collection of different lives happening under one roof. The lord resting behind a curtain, the servant wrapped in a rough blanket, the guard listening for movement, the child sleeping near family. All are connected by the same stone walls. The castle stands firm against the winter night, but the people inside are what truly make it a place of survival. They bring warmth where they can. They create routines where uncertainty exists. They turn a cold fortress into a temporary home. The wind continues to strike the towers. The fires continue to glow. And as the evening becomes deeper, the castle prepares for the moment when nearly everyone must finally close their eyes and enter the uncertain comfort of sleep. The evening settles deeper inside the castle, and the rhythm of the fortress begins to slow. The storm outside continues its powerful song, but within the walls. People move through familiar routines that have guided winter nights for generations. You follow the last footsteps across the stone floor. A servant carries a wooden bucket toward the kitchens. A guard checks a doorway one final time. Someone adds another log to the fire before the flames become too weak. These actions seem ordinary, but on a night like this, they are the invisible foundation of survival. Before anyone can sleep, the castle must be prepared. You enter the kitchen area, where warmth still lingers from the day's cooking. The smell of roasted food, smoke, and stored grain remains in the air. The great ovens have cooled slightly, but the stones around them still hold traces of heat. Medieval kitchens were often among the warmest places in a castle. They were busy centres of activity where meals were prepared, supplies were managed, and workers gathered. During winter, they also became places where people naturally moved closer to warmth. The cooks have finished their work, the pots are cleaned, the fires are reduced. The night begins. You notice how different groups inside the castle prepare for rest. A noble family follows a careful evening routine filled with tradition and privacy. Servants follow a different rhythm, shaped by responsibilities and the needs of others. A castle is not a single household. It is a small society. The lord of the castle may retire earlier, But his household continues working. A servant responsible for fires cannot simply ignore the cold because everyone else wants sleep. A guard cannot forget his duties because the storm sounds frightening outside. Winter creates a strange balance between comfort and responsibility. You imagine a young servant carrying blankets through the corridors. The fabric feels heavy in their arms. The wool is rough but valuable. Every covering represents preparation from earlier months when animals were sheared and materials were collected. Wool was one of the most important materials in medieval Europe. It provided clothing, blankets, and protection from harsh weather for many people. Staying warm depended on the quality and availability of wool products. The wealthy had more options, the poor had fewer, but almost everyone relied on similar basic ideas. Layer clothing. Protect the body, stay near warmth, reduce exposure. You walk toward the sleeping areas and notice the difference between rooms. Some chambers have wooden furniture, wall coverings, and private fireplaces. Others are simpler spaces with fewer belongings and more shared arrangements. The idea of personal space was very different in the medieval world. Many people were accustomed to living, working, and sleeping close to others. Privacy existed mostly as a privilege rather than a normal expectation. Historians still debate how common separate sleeping areas were among different social groups in medieval castles, because surviving records mostly describe wealthy households rather than ordinary workers. The daily experiences of servants remain harder to reconstruct. That uncertainty creates a fascinating picture. A single winter night in a castle contained many different realities. You move past a doorway and hear quiet conversation inside. A family member tells a story while children prepare for bed. The voices are gentle, almost hidden beneath the storm. Storytelling was an important part of medieval evening life, especially during long winter nights when darkness arrived early. Without modern entertainment, people relied on conversation, songs, memories, and traditions. The night was longer. The imagination became warmer. A strange little detail appears in medieval household records. Some wealthy homes used special sleeping arrangements where attendants remained nearby during the night to assist their lords or protect valuable belongings. To modern ears, this sounds unusual, but medieval households operated through constant personal service. Even sleep had a social structure. You leave the warmer rooms and enter a quieter corridor. The temperature drops immediately. The stone beneath your feet feels colder. The sound of the wind becomes clearer through the narrow openings. This is where you understand the challenge of medieval winter. The castle does not erase the season. It simply creates layers between people and the worst of it. The thick walls block the strongest winds. The fireplaces provide islands of warmth. The clothing provides protection. The community provides support. Every advantage matters. You reach an area where soldiers prepare their sleeping spaces. Their equipment rests nearby. Their conversations are shorter because they know the night watch will begin soon. They are not preparing for a peaceful holiday evening. They are preparing for another ordinary night in an uncertain world. Yet even here there are moments of calm. A soldier warms his hands near the fire. A worker shares a small joke. Someone closes a wooden door against the storm. Small comforts survive anywhere. You continue upward through the castle, feeling the atmosphere change. The busy sounds of evening disappear. The firelight becomes softer. The shadows grow longer across the walls. Soon, most of the castle will be asleep. But before that happens, every person must find their own place within the fortress. Every blanket must be arranged. Every fire must be checked. Every responsibility must be complete. The storm may rule the world outside. Inside, people create order. They have done this for centuries. They will do it again tomorrow. And as you stand within the ancient stone corridors of this winter castle, you realize that bedtime was never simply the end of the day. It was another part of medieval life, shaped by weather, tradition, work, and the endless human search for warmth. The castle has grown quieter now. The evening activities that filled the halls have faded into softer movements, and the Great Hall begins its transformation from a place of gathering into a place of rest. You step into the enormous chamber and immediately notice the change in atmosphere. Earlier, this room carried the sounds of conversation, footsteps, and the clatter of meals. Now, only the fire speaks. Flames move slowly behind the fireplace opening, sending warm light across wooden tables and rough stone walls. The storm outside remains powerful. The hall remains steady. For many medieval castles, the Great Hall was the heart of daily life. It was where people ate, met, celebrated, and received guests during difficult winters. It could also become one of the most practical places for sleeping because it offered space, warmth, and protection from the worst conditions. You look around the room and imagine how it appears after sunset in 1378. Long tables remain where people gathered earlier. Benches stand against the walls. The last candles flicker in metal holders. Shadows move across the ceiling as the fire struggles against the cold air. The room is not empty. It is simply resting. Servants begin arranging sleeping spaces. Some bedding is placed near walls where drafts are weaker. Others settle closer to the fireplace. Although nobody wants to sleep too close because sparks and smoke create their own problems. Warmth requires balance. Too far from the fire, and the cold becomes uncomfortable. Too close, and the smoke becomes irritating. Medieval life often involved choosing between imperfect options. You notice the smell of the hall changing through the night. The scent of cooked food has weakened, replaced by burning wood, candle wax, wool clothing, and the earthy smell of damp boots drying near the edges of the room. These small details reveal something important. A castle was not a silent museum. It was a living place. People brought in mud from outside. Animals brought their own smells. Fires left traces on everything. Hundreds of daily activities created an atmosphere that was very different from the clean. Controlled spaces people expect today. Yet to those living there, this was normal. You walk closer to the sleeping areas and see how people prepare their bedding. Medieval mattresses varied greatly depending on wealth and location. Some wealthy households used layered materials, while simpler sleepers might use sacks filled with straw or other available materials. A bed was not always a piece of furniture. Sometimes it was simply a prepared place on the floor. The word comfort meant something different. A dry place, a warm covering, a protected corner. These things could feel luxurious after a freezing day. Historians know that medieval people used various natural materials for bedding, including wool and plant fibers. However, historians still argue whether some descriptions of medieval sleeping arrangements represent everyday reality or the experiences of wealthier households that left more written evidence. The ordinary person sleeping in the Great Hall is harder to see. Their story survives through small clues. A worn blanket, a repaired piece of clothing, a simple mention in a household record. You sit quietly in the imagined hall and hear the sounds around you. Someone coughs softly. A piece of wood shifts inside the fireplace. The wind pushes against the shutters. The entire building seems to move slightly with the storm. There is something strangely comforting about these sounds. The castle is not perfectly warm. It is not perfectly quiet, but it is alive. A curious detail from medieval household life is that people often slept with clothing nearby or even partially dressed, especially during colder seasons. Getting fully comfortable was less important than being ready to respond quickly if something happened during the night. The idea of preparing for emergencies was built into daily life. A castle was a home, but it was also a fortress. You notice a guard passing through the edge of the hall. His footsteps are slow and measured. He checks the fire and looks toward the doors before continuing his duties. The people sleeping here are never completely separated from the outside world. The storm reminds them of nature's power. The walls remind them of human effort. The fire reminds them of cooperation. Hours pass slowly. The candles become shorter. The flames become smaller. The voices disappear. The Great Hall enters its nighttime form. You can almost feel the exhaustion settling over the room. After a long winter day, bodies seek rest, hands that carried supplies become still, voices that gave instructions become whispers, eyes that watched the weather finally begin to close. Outside, the blizzard continues across the landscape. Inside, dozens of people share the same fragile warmth. There is something deeply human about this scene. Across centuries, people have ended their days in similar ways. They have searched for safe places. They have shared warmth. They have listened to storms and hoped for peaceful mornings. The Great Hall does not provide perfect comfort. It provides enough. And sometimes enough is what allows people to endure. You remain there for a moment longer, watching the final embers glow. The stone walls surround everyone like a silent guardian. The storm may continue for hours, but the castle has settled into its nightly rhythm. The Great Hall sleeps, the fortress breathes, and the longest part of the winter night begins. You leave the quiet warmth of the Great Hall and climb a narrow staircase toward the upper rooms of the castle. The stone steps are uneven beneath your feet, worn down by generations of people who have walked this same path. The higher you rise, the quieter the fortress becomes. The sounds below slowly disappear. The voices fade. The fire becomes distant. Only the wind remains. At the top of the staircase here, you reach the private chambers of the noble household. Here, the experience of sleeping through a winter blizzard is very different from the crowded spaces below. Wealth does not remove the cold completely, but it creates more layers between the person and the harsh world outside. A wooden door opens. You enter a chamber where the atmosphere feels calmer. A small fireplace burns along one wall, sending gentle warmth into the room. Heavy fabrics hang from the walls, and thick curtains surround the sleeping area. The air carries the smell of burning wood, beeswax candles, and wool blankets. This is the closest thing to comfort inside a medieval castle. A noble bedroom in the late 14th century represented more than a place to sleep. It was a symbol of status, family, and security. Important meetings could happen here, personal belongings were stored here, private conversations took place behind these walls. Sleep was connected to social position. The person with the highest status usually had the greatest protection from the cold. You look toward the bed and notice that it is far different from a simple blanket placed on the floor. Wealthy medieval beds could be large wooden structures with curtains, mattresses, and multiple layers of fabric designed to provide warmth and privacy. The bed itself was valuable. The materials mattered. The coverings mattered. Even the location inside the room mattered. A bed positioned away from drafts could make a significant difference during a freezing night. You imagine the lord or lady preparing for rest after a long winter day. Clothing is removed carefully. Personal items are placed nearby. The fire is checked one final time. Servants may assist with the preparations before leaving the room. The process is slower than modern bedtime routines. Sleep requires preparation. A cold night cannot simply be ignored. You feel the warmth of the fireplace as you move closer. The flames create moving patterns across the walls. Outside the curtains, the storm continues to attack the castle with powerful gusts. But inside this chamber, the sound feels distant. The contrast is striking. The world outside is wild, and the room inside is controlled. Yet even the wealthiest residents cannot escape every problem. Medieval castles had limits. Smoke from fireplaces could still irritate the eyes. Dampness could remain a constant challenge. Cold corners existed even in expensive chambers. Comfort was relative. A noble bedroom might feel luxurious compared with a servant's sleeping area, but it was still part of a medieval building designed before modern heating and insulation. You notice small details that reveal daily life. The wooden furniture shows signs of careful use. The fabrics require maintenance. Candles must be replaced. Firewood must continue arriving. Luxury depends on labour. Many people work so that one person could sleep more comfortably. This is one of the most important parts of understanding medieval castles. The warmth of a noble chamber was connected to countless unseen efforts throughout the household. A servant carried wood, a worker prepared materials, someone cleaned the room, someone repaired damaged items. Behind every comfortable night was a network of ordinary tasks. Historians still debate how widespread certain luxurious sleeping arrangements were among medieval nobles, because surviving examples often come from wealthier families and important residences. Smaller castles and less wealthy households likely had simpler conditions, even among people with higher status. The image of every noble sleeping in perfect comfort is probably exaggerated. Reality was more complicated. You sit beside the imaginary fireplace and listen carefully. The storm creates a low, constant sound beyond the walls. The flames crack softly. The curtains move slightly from a small draught entering the room. The chamber feels peaceful, but the night is still winter. A fascinating detail about medieval bedrooms is that privacy itself was a form of luxury. Many ordinary people lived in shared spaces where sleeping, working, and family activities happened close together. A private chamber was not just warmer, it was quieter, it was personal. It created a rare separation from the busy world of the castle. You look around the room and imagine the final moments before sleep. A prayer may be spoken, a servant may leave after completing duties, the fire may be adjusted, the curtains may close around the bed. Then darkness arrives. The person inside this chamber sleeps while the storm continues outside. The castle does not stop. Guards remain awake. Servants rest lightly. Animals shift in their spaces. But here, behind thick curtains and stone walls, there is a brief moment of stillness. You begin to understand that medieval sleep was shaped by many things at once. Weather, wealth, work, tradition, architecture, human cooperation. A bed was never just a bed. It was a reflection of the world around it. The noble chamber offers warmth, but it also reveals a deeper truth. Even people surrounded by privilege depended on the same basic things as everyone else. Fire, shelter, companionship, a safe place to close their eyes. The blizzard continues outside the castle. The candles burn lower. The room grows quieter. And somewhere beneath this chamber, servants and workers are preparing for their own night of rest in very different conditions. You leave the noble chamber behind and begin descending toward the lower parts of the castle, where the warmth is weaker and the sounds of work are more constant. The staircase feels colder with every step downward. The stone walls seem to hold on to the winter air more strongly here. The difference is immediate. Above, there was privacy. Below, there is activity. You enter the spaces where servants spend their nights, and you discover another side of castle life. These rooms are not designed around comfort or elegance. They are designed around usefulness, because the people sleeping here are also the people responsible for keeping the castle functioning. The air carries the smell of smoke, damp clothing, and stored supplies. The sounds are different too. You hear quiet conversations, the movement of wooden containers, and the occasional crackle from a smaller fire nearby. This is where many of the castle's invisible workers rest. Servants were essential to medieval households. They prepared food, maintained fires, cleaned rooms, cared for animals, carried supplies, and supported the daily life of the noble family. Their work continued through every season, including the harshest winter nights. A blizzard did not create a holiday. The tasks remained. You imagine a servant returning after carrying firewood through the snowy courtyard. Their boots are wet, their hands are tired, their clothing carries the cold smell of the outside air. They are finally finished for the evening, but their sleeping place offers only limited relief. The room is simple. The warmth is shared. The space is crowded. Unlike a private noble chamber, servant sleeping areas often require people to live closely together. Several individuals might share a room or sleeping area, depending on the size of the household and the available space. Sharing warmth was practical. It was also necessary. You notice how people arrange themselves around the available comfort. Someone chooses a place closer to the heat. Someone places folded clothing beneath their head. Someone repairs a small tear in a blanket before lying down. Nothing is wasted. Everything has value. In medieval life, materials required time and effort. A damaged blanket was repaired. A worn piece of clothing was reused. A simple item could represent hours of labour from many people. You look at the rough bedding prepared on the floor. It is not elegant, but it serves its purpose. Straw-filled mattresses, wool coverings, and layers of clothing helped create a barrier between the body and the cold ground. The goal was not luxury. The goal was rest, and rest allowed people to continue. Historians still debate the exact sleeping arrangements of medieval servants because records rarely describe their private lives in detail. Most surviving documents focus on nobles, religious institutions, or official events, rather than ordinary household routines. The people who kept castles alive often left behind the fewest written memories. That makes these quiet spaces even more meaningful. You imagine the conversations happening here before sleep. Workers discussing the storm, someone telling a small story from earlier in the day, a person laughing softly despite exhaustion. Human connection did not disappear because life was difficult. In fact, it may have become more important. A curious detail about medieval households is that servants were not always separated completely from their employers. Some personal attendants slept close enough to respond quickly if needed, especially in important households. The boundaries between work and rest could be very different from modern expectations. Even nighttime had responsibilities. You walk through the room slowly and notice how everyone prepares differently. Some people sleep immediately because they are exhausted. Others remain awake briefly, enjoying the rare quiet after a busy day. The storm creates a strange feeling. The outside world feels enormous and dangerous. The inside world feels small and familiar. The castle becomes a collection of tiny communities, the noble family upstairs, the workers below, the guards near the walls, the animals in their shelters, everyone connected by the same fortress. You hear the wind pressing against the lower windows. The sound is deeper here, almost like the castle itself is speaking. The thick walls block the strongest gusts, but they cannot remove the presence of the storm. Winter is always nearby. A person sleeping in this room knows that. They know the morning may bring more work. They know the snow may make tasks harder. They know the firewood supply must be protected and the animals must be cared for. Yet they still sleep, because humans have always adapted. You notice a small wooden container beside one sleeping area. Perhaps it holds personal belongings. Perhaps it contains tools needed for work. There are no treasures here, but there are signs of individual lives. A repaired shoe, a folded garment, a small object kept close. These details reveal something important. Servants were not simply workers inside a castle. They were people with routines, friendships, worries, and hopes. The medieval world often appears distant, but moments like this feel familiar. After a long day, people everywhere seek the same things. A safe place, a little warmth, a few peaceful hours. You remain in the lower room as the castle grows darker. The smaller fire continues burning. The conversations become quieter. One by one, people settle into their sleeping places. The night continues. The blizzard continues. But inside this crowded room, the castle's workers finally find a moment of rest. Their sleep may not be luxurious. Their beds may not be comfortable. But their presence makes the entire fortress possible. Without them, the fires would fade. The halls would become silent. The castle would no longer feel alive. And as you leave this room behind, you carry with you the understanding that medieval survival was built not only by kings and warriors, but also by the countless ordinary people who kept the lights burning through the darkest nights. You remain inside the lower rooms of the castle for a little longer, watching as people settle into their sleeping places. The storm outside continues, but now your attention turns to the most important object of the night, the bed. It seems simple, yet in medieval life, A place to sleep revealed much about a person's position, resources, and daily reality. You walk closer to the sleeping arrangements and notice that a medieval bed is not always what you imagine today. There are no perfectly soft mattresses, carefully designed frames, or rooms built around ideal comfort. Instead, medieval people created warmth using whatever materials they had available. A bed was a collection of practical solutions: wood, straw, wool, fabric, human effort. You touch the edge of a rough wool covering and feel the texture beneath your fingers. It is thick, durable, and slightly coarse. Wool was one of the most valuable materials in medieval Europe because it helped people survive cold weather. The same material could become clothing during the day and protection during the night. A person's survival depended on layers. The cold outside did not disappear because someone went to sleep. The body still needed protection from freezing air, stone floors, and nighttime drafts moving through the castle. You look at a simple sleeping place prepared for a worker. A stuffed mattress rests on the floor, covered with blankets and clothing. It is not impressive, but it creates separation from the cold surface below. That small separation matters. A cold floor can steal warmth quickly. A layer of straw can provide insulation. A wool blanket can trap body heat. These small improvements could make a difficult night more manageable. The wealthy experienced sleeping differently. In a noble chamber, the bed could become one of the most important pieces of furniture in the room. Large wooden frames, curtains, and multiple coverings showed both status and practicality. A large bed was not only for sleeping. It represented wealth. It represented security. It represented a person's place in society. You imagine the contrast between two rooms inside the same castle. Upstairs, a noble bed surrounded by fabric and privacy. Below, several workers sharing warmth in a simpler arrangement. Both people sleep beneath the same storm. Both depend on the same winter night passing, but their experiences are very different. Historians know that medieval bedding changed across regions and social groups. Wealthier households left more records about their possessions. While ordinary people rarely documented their sleeping materials, historians still debate how common certain bedding practices were among everyday medieval workers because evidence remains incomplete. The silence of the records hides many ordinary lives. You continue walking through the sleeping area and notice the smell surrounding these beds. Straw carries an earthy scent. Wool holds traces of smoke from nearby fires. Wooden frames release the familiar smell of old timber. The room feels natural. It feels handmade. Everything here comes from the surrounding world. Unlike modern bedrooms filled with manufactured materials, medieval sleeping spaces depended heavily on local resources. Farmers raised animals that provided wool. Workers collected plants for filling materials. Craftspeople created wooden frames and repaired damaged items. A bed connected many people. Even a simple sleeping place carried the work of an entire community. A curious detail from medieval life is that straw mattresses required regular replacement and maintenance. They were practical but not permanent. Materials changed over time, and households had to prepare fresh supplies when old bedding became worn or unsuitable. The idea of simply buying a new mattress would have been completely foreign. People repaired. People reused. People adapted. You sit beside the imaginary fire and think about the strange relationship medieval people had with comfort. They were not expecting the same softness or convenience that people seek today. Their idea of a good night was shaped by their environment. A successful night meant staying dry. A successful night meant staying warm enough. A successful night meant waking up ready for another day. Comfort was measured by survival. You hear someone adjusting their blanket nearby. The sound is quiet, almost lost beneath the storm. A person turns slightly, searching for the warmest position. Another pulls a covering closer around their shoulders. Small movements. Small decisions, important ones. The body naturally searches for warmth, no matter the century. You begin to notice how sleeping arrangements also shaped social relationships. Shared rooms meant people were rarely completely alone. Families, workers, and guards often slept within hearing distance of others. Privacy was limited. Companionship was common. A person falling asleep in a medieval castle usually did so surrounded by signs of human presence. The sound of breathing, the movement of blankets, the occasional whisper, the continuing vape. The night was shared. Even the darkness belonged to everyone. You look toward the doorway and imagine the castle slowly becoming still. The beds are prepared. The coverings are arranged. The fires are lowered. The last conversations disappear into silence. Outside, the blizzard continues covering the land. Inside, hundreds of small choices protect people from the cold. A thicker blanket, a better sleeping position, a place closer to warmth, a repaired piece of fabric. These details may seem insignificant, but they were the foundation of medieval winter survival. The people of 1378 did not defeat winter with technology. They defeated it with preparation. They understood their materials. They understood their surroundings. They understood the importance of making the most of what they had. As you leave the sleeping area, you glance back at the simple beds resting beneath the castle walls. They are not luxurious. They are not perfect, but they tell a story. A story of adaptation. A story of patience. Come on, then. A story of ordinary people finding rest in an extraordinary environment. The storm remains outdoor, the castle remains strong, and beneath the heavy blankets of medieval winter, people slowly drift into sleep. The night has fully arrived now, and the castle feels surrounded by another world. You stand near a narrow window opening and look toward the courtyard below. The storm has transformed the landscape completely. Paths have disappeared beneath snow, wooden fences are buried, and the familiar shapes of the day have become shadows. The blizzard has taken control of everything outside. Inside the castle, people understand one important truth. Winter must be respected. The cold cannot be ignored. You feel a chill moving through the corridor as a servant quickly passes by carrying another bundle of wood. The door behind them closes, but a small amount of freezing air remains. The smell of snow mixes with smoke from the fireplaces, creating the unmistakable atmosphere of a medieval winter night. The storm is not just a beautiful scene, it is a challenge. For the people living in a castle during 1378, weather affected nearly every part of daily life. Travel became difficult. Supplies became more important, fires needed more attention, animals required protection. A single harsh night could test every preparation made during the previous months. You move toward the inner rooms where people are trying to rest. The castle walls block much of the wind, but the sound still reaches everyone. It rushes around towers, shakes wooden shutters, and whistles through small openings. The sound becomes part of the night. People learn to sleep with it. Medieval castles were often built in strategic locations such as hills or elevated areas, which provided defensive advantages, but could also expose them to strong winds and harsh weather. The same height that helped protect a fortress from enemies could make winter storms feel even more powerful. You imagine standing on the tower during this night. The cold air would feel sharp against your face. Snow would cover the stone surfaces. The world below would appear empty and frozen. But you are not outside. You're inside the fortress, and that changes everything. You walk back toward the sleeping areas and notice how carefully people have prepared for the storm. Blankets are arranged differently. Fires are checked more often. Doors are secured. Everyone becomes more aware of small details. Winter creates attention. A person cannot simply forget the cold. A forgotten task can make the night much harder. You hear a servant adjusting the fire in a nearby room. The wood crackles loudly for a moment before settling into a steady glow. The warmth spreads slowly, touching hands and faces before disappearing into the enormous space around it. Fire is never wasted. Every log matters. Every flame has a purpose. In medieval castles, fireplaces were essential for heating and cooking. although they could not warm large stone spaces evenly. People often gathered near them because the heat remained limited. A fireplace created a small island of comfort inside a much colder environment. You notice another unusual detail about medieval winter life. Some households used rushes or plant materials spread across floors to improve comfort and reduce the feeling of cold stone beneath their feet. These materials also helped manage dirt and moisture, although they required regular replacement. Small solutions created large differences. You continue through the castle as the storm reaches its strongest moments. The wind becomes louder. The wooden beams make soft sounds overhead. The darkness outside feels endless, yet the castle remains active. A guard walks along the walls. A servant checks supplies. Someone wakes briefly and adds more covering. Sleep is interrupted by responsibility. Historians still argue about how much medieval people adjusted their sleeping patterns during extreme weather, because personal accounts from ordinary households are limited. Some evidence suggests people adapted their routines around available light, warmth, and work needs, but the exact experience of a winter night remains difficult to fully reconstruct. That mystery makes the past feel closer. You are not looking at a perfect story. You are looking at human survival. The people inside this castle are not heroes from a legend. They are ordinary individuals facing an ordinary winter problem in an extraordinary setting. Someone misses the warmth of summer. Someone worries about, tomorrow's tasks. Someone simply hopes the storm ends before morning. These feelings have changed very little across centuries. You pause beside another window and watch snow gathering against the stone. The moon occasionally appears through moving clouds, creating brief moments of pale light across the courtyard. The castle looks almost peaceful. Almost. The storm reminds you that comfort is temporary. The people inside this fortress are protected, but they are still connected to nature's power. They cannot control the weather. They can only prepare. They can only adapt. They can only wait. The hours move slowly. The fires burn lower. The voices become fewer. The castle settles deeper into the night. Somewhere above, a noble family sleeps behind thick curtains. Somewhere below, workers rest under simple blankets. Somewhere near the entrance, guards remain awake. Different lives, one fortress, one storm, one long winter night. You feel the cold air around the stone walls, but you also feel the warmth created by human effort. The castle is not comfortable because of its size or strength alone. It is comfortable because people maintain it. They carry the wood. They protect They share the warmth. They continue. Outside, the blizzard covers the medieval landscape. Inside, the castle holds its quiet community together. And as the storm continues through the darkness, you begin to understand that surviving a winter night in 1378 was not about escaping the cold completely. It was about finding enough warmth to rest until morning. The deepest part of the night approaches, and the castle begins its most important task, keeping the fire alive. You walk toward the largest fireplace in the fortress and feel the warmth before you reach it. The air becomes slightly softer. The stone beneath your feet feels less unforgiving. The orange glow from the flames moves across the walls, creating a small circle of comfort inside the darkness. But the fire demands attention. It cannot simply be left alone. A medieval winter night is a constant conversation between people and flame. The people need warmth. The fire needs wood. The wood requires preparation, transportation, and careful use. Everything is connected. You watch as a servant quietly approaches the fireplace. Their footsteps are slow because most of the castle is asleep. They add another piece of wood and adjust the embers with a long metal tool. The flames rise briefly, sending tiny sparks upward before settling again. The sound is calming. The crackling wood, the soft movement of air, the distant storm, together. These sounds create the nighttime atmosphere of the castle. Fire was one of the most important resources in medieval households. It provided heat, allowed cooking, offered light, and created a gathering place. Without reliable fires, winter survival became much more difficult. Yet medieval fireplaces were far from perfect. Large stone rooms were difficult to heat. Smoke could spread through spaces. Warmth could disappear quickly once the fire weakened. People learned to organize their lives around the limits of their heating methods. They did not expect every room to feel warm. They expected to find warmth where it existed. You notice how different parts of the castle depend on different fires. The kitchen has its own heat from cooking. The Great Hall has a larger fireplace for gatherings. Private chambers may have smaller fireplaces. Work areas may rely on whatever warmth is available. Each flame creates its own small world. You imagine the people responsible for maintaining these fires. Their work begins before the coldest hours arrive. Wood must be collected, stored, and protected from moisture. Fires must be prepared before people become desperate for warmth. A forgotten fire could create problems. The night watch must think ahead. The servants must think ahead. Everyone must think ahead. Winter rewards preparation. You walk toward the storage areas and see stacks of firewood carefully arranged. The smell of dry timber fills the air. These supplies represent months of planning before the snow arrived. Medieval castles needed large amounts of stored resources during winter. Food, fuel, and materials had to be available when travel became difficult. A storm could isolate a castle from surrounding communities, making preparation essential. The castle survives because tomorrow was considered before today ended. You pause beside the wood and notice small details. Some pieces are perfectly dry, others show signs of age. Each piece has a purpose. Larger logs burn longer. Smaller pieces help start or strengthen flames. Even fire has a routine. A curious detail about medieval fireplaces is that some wealthy households use metal objects to improve cooking and heating efficiency, including tools for moving logs and managing embers. These objects may seem ordinary, but they reveal how much attention was given to controlling limited sources of warmth. The people of the castle understood fire. They respected it. They depended on it. You return to the sleeping areas and notice how people position themselves around this resource. Those who can sleep near warmth often do. Those farther away rely more heavily on blankets and clothing. The closer someone is to the fire, the greater the comfort. The farther away, the stronger the need for protection. This simple difference shapes the night. Historians still argue about the exact temperature conditions inside medieval castles during winter because surviving evidence rarely provides precise measurements. The experience likely varied greatly depending on architecture, fireplace design, weather severity, and the number of people sharing the space. The castle was never one temperature. It was many temperatures: a warm corner, a cold hallway, a smoky chamber, a quiet room. Each person experienced winter differently. You hear the fire behind you as you continue through the castle. The sound follows you like a companion. Even when you leave the warmth, you know it is there. The flames represent something deeper than heat. They represent effort. Someone gathered the wood. Someone carried it inside. Someone protected the fire. Someone kept watch. Warmth was created by many hands. Outside, the blizzard continues. Snow pushes against the walls. The wind moves through the towers. Nature remains powerful and unpredictable. Inside, human patience answers with a small but steady flame. The contrast feels almost peaceful. The storm cannot be stopped. The night cannot be shortened. But the people inside the castle have created a way to endure. You imagine the final hours before sunrise. The fire is lower now, but still alive. The embers glow beneath the ash. A servant checks it one more time before resting. The task continues. The responsibility continues. The warmth continues. And as you stand beside the ancient fireplace, you realize that the story of sleeping in a medieval castle is not only about beds and blankets. It is about everything that had to happen before anyone could close their eyes. The wood carried inside. The flames carefully managed. The rooms prepared. the people protected. Only after all of this could the castle finally sleep. The castle has reached the quietest part of the night, when even small sounds seem important. You walk through the dark corridors and notice how different the fortress feels after everyone has settled down. During the day, the castle belongs to movement. At night, it belongs to whispers. The storm outside continues its endless rhythm. Wind pushes against the towers. Snow brushes across the walls somewhere above. Loose wooden parts shift slightly beneath the pressure of the weather. The sounds are not frightening, but they remind everyone that the castle is surrounded by a powerful winter world. You move slowly through the passageways, careful not to disturb those who are sleeping. The only light comes from small candles and the fading glow of fireplaces. Shadows stretch across the stone surfaces, making familiar places appear mysterious. A medieval castle at midnight is a different place. The rooms are still there, the people are still there, but everything has changed. You hear footsteps in the distance. A guard walks along a corridor, checking doors and entrances. The sound of boots against stone travels farther than it would during the busy hours of the day. Every movement becomes clearer because the usual noise of life has disappeared. The night reveals the castle's hidden sounds. You pause near the great hall where many people are resting. The fire has become smaller, but the embers still glow warmly. You hear quiet breathing, occasional movements beneath blankets, and the soft sounds of people adjusting their sleeping positions. Sleep is never completely silent, especially in a medieval castle. People shared spaces closely, and nighttime sounds were a normal part of life. A person might hear someone turning over, someone coughing, someone waking briefly, or someone preparing to leave for a duty. The darkness was filled with human presence. You notice how different the experience of nighttime would feel compared with modern life. There are no electric lights filling the corners. There are no machines humming in distant rooms. The darkness is much deeper, and the small sounds of the castle become more noticeable. A candle burning, a fire moving, a door closing, a person breathing. The world becomes smaller. The senses become sharper. Historians know that medieval people lived with a much stronger awareness of natural sounds because their environment contained fewer artificial noises. However, historians still debate how people emotionally experienced nighttime darkness, because written records often describe religious beliefs and daily duties more than personal feelings about the night. The private thoughts of ordinary sleepers remain mostly hidden. Imagine those thoughts now. A worker wondering what tomorrow will bring. A guard thinking about the storm. A child listening to the wind and waiting for morning. A noble person resting behind curtains while the castle continues around them. The night belongs to everyone differently. You continue walking and notice the smell of the castle after midnight. The strong scents of cooking have disappeared. What remains is the smell of old wood, cooled stone, candle smoke, and the faint warmth of nearby fires. It is a quiet mixture, a smell connected to shelter, a smell connected to survival. You pass a small room where someone has left a piece of clothing near the fire. The fabric slowly dries after being exposed to snow earlier in the evening. Keeping clothing dry is just as important as keeping the body warm. Cold and moisture together create discomfort. Medieval people understood this through experience. They knew that a dry blanket was valuable. They knew that wet shoes could make the next day harder. They knew that a little preparation before sleep could protect them through the night. A curious detail from medieval households is that people often used household animals as part of their nighttime environment. Dogs could provide companionship and protection, while other animals nearby reflected the practical connection between human homes and the creatures that supported daily life. The castle was never completely separate from the natural world. Animals, weather, and people existed together. You return toward the upper corridors and hear the wind moving through narrow openings. The sound rises and falls like a slow breath. For someone unfamiliar with the castle, the noises might seem strange. For the people living here, they are familiar. A castle speaks at night. The walls creak. The fires crackle. The wind sings through the stones. These sounds become part of a sleep, is self. You begin to understand that medieval rest was not about escaping all disturbances. It was about accepting the environment and finding comfort within it. The storm does not need to become silent. The room does not need to become perfect. The night only needs to become bearable. You look through another narrow window and see the snow-covered landscape outside. The moon appears briefly between clouds, revealing the white fields surrounding the fortress. The scene is beautiful, but the beauty hides the difficulty of the season. Winter has always carried two faces. One is peaceful, one is demanding. Inside the castle, people experience both. The storm creates danger, but it also creates moments of stillness. The long winter night gives people time to rest, reflect, and share stories. It creates memories that may never be written down but are still part of human history. You return to the sleeping chambers as the final hours of darkness pass slowly. The castle is no longer busy. It has entered a deep state of quiet. The guards continue their watch. The fires continue their slow burning. The sleepers continue their dreams. And beneath the ancient stone walls of 1378, the fortress holds thousands of small sounds together, creating a peaceful nighttime world inside the storm. The night watch begins another quiet journey through the castle, and you follow the footsteps of the people who remain awake while everyone else seeks rest. The storm outside continues to surround the fortress, but the guards move through the darkness with practiced calm. Their world is different. While others close their eyes, they listen. While others seek warmth, they walk through cold corridors. While others dream, they remain responsible for protecting the castle. You stand near the entrance passage and feel the temperature drop as the large wooden doors receive the pressure of the winter wind. The smell of damp stone and burning torches fills the air. The light from the flames flickers against the walls, creating moving shadows that follow the guards as they pass. A medieval castle never truly sleeps. Someone is always awake. The guards are among the most important people during a winter night because the protection of the fortress depends on their attention. Their duties include watching entrances, checking walls, and remaining alert for anything unusual. The storm itself becomes part of their challenge. Heavy snow can hide movement. Strong winds can create confusing sounds. Darkness can make ordinary things appear unfamiliar. A guard must understand the difference. You imagine standing on the castle wall during this blizzard. The wind would push against your clothing. Snow would collect on your shoulders. Your hands would become cold even through gloves. Yet the guard remains. The watch cannot be abandoned simply because the weather is unpleasant. Responsibility continues through every season. Medieval castles often maintained organized systems of guards and watches, especially in important locations. The number of people involved depended on the size, importance, and resources of the castle. Some smaller fortresses had fewer defenders, while major residences required larger groups. The night was divided into periods of duty. Someone watched, someone rested, someone replaced them. The rhythm continued until morning. You follow one guard along a narrow corridor leading toward the towers. The stone steps are cold beneath your feet. Each movement creates a quiet echo. The castle feels enormous when most people are asleep. During the day, crowds make the fortress feel smaller. At night, the empty spaces seem much larger. The guard carries a light source that creates only a small circle of visibility. Beyond that circle, darkness fills the halls. The limited light changes how people experienced medieval buildings after sunset. A candle or torch did not remove darkness completely. It created small islands within it. You notice the guard pausing near a doorway. A sound comes from somewhere beyond the walls. The wind moves strongly through the tower openings. The guard waits, listens, and continues. Experience matters. A person living in a medieval castle learned the normal sounds of their environment. They knew how wood sounded when it shifted. They knew how animals moved. They knew how storms changed the atmosphere. The familiar became a form of protection. Historians still argue about the exact routines of medieval night guards because surviving descriptions often focus on military events rather than ordinary shifts during peaceful periods. The daily experience of a guard standing awake through cold nights remains partly hidden behind limited evidence. But we know one thing clearly: someone had to stay awake. You continue toward the tower and feel the difference between protected rooms and exposed areas. The wind becomes stronger here, the air feels sharper. The warmth of fireplaces seems far away. The guard accepts this discomfort because their role depends on it. A curious detail about medieval guards is that their duties were not always only about enemies. They also had to monitor practical problems such as fires, damaged structures, animals, and unusual activity within the castle itself. Protection meant more than watching for attackers, it meant watching everything. You imagine the guard looking across the snowy landscape. The castle sits like a dark shape against the white ground. The storm hides the world beyond the walls. There are no travellers approaching tonight. Only winter. Only wind. Only time passing slowly. The guard's thoughts may wander. They may think about home, food, tomorrow's work, or the simple hope of reaching a warmer room again. Even people with serious responsibilities remained human. They felt tired. They felt cold. They waited for morning. You return with the guard toward the interior rooms. The sound of the storm becomes softer again. The warmth of the castle slowly returns. The sleeping residents remain unaware of every small action happening around them. That is the quiet relationship between the sleeping and the awake. Those who rest depend on those who remain alert. The castle functions because different people carry different burdens. Some maintain the fires, some prepare the food, some guard the walls, some sleep and recover for another day of work. Every role matters. You pause beside the fading fireplace and watch the guard warm their hands briefly. The moment is small, but it feels important. After hours of cold air and responsibility, even a few seconds of warmth can feel valuable. The fire does not last forever. The watch does not last forever. The night does not last forever. Soon, the first signs of morning will arrive. But for now, the castle remains suspended between darkness and dawn. The blizzard continues outside. The guards continue their watch. And deep inside the stone fortress, thousands of people sleep because someone is still awake. As the night continues, you move away from the sleeping chambers and toward another important part of medieval castle life: the animals. To modernize. It may seem unusual to think about animals during a story about sleep. But inside a medieval fortress, humans and animals shared a much closer relationship. A castle was not only a place for people, it was a place where horses, dogs, and other creatures played essential roles in daily survival. The storm outside affects them too. You walk toward the areas where animals are sheltered and immediately notice a different atmosphere. The air feels warmer here. The smell of hay, leather, and animals fills the space. The sounds are softer than the noise of the blizzard, but they create their own nighttime rhythm. A horse shifts its weight. A dog moves across the floor. Hay rustles quietly. The castle is still awake in its own way. Animals were central to medieval life. Horses carried people and supplies. Dogs helped with hunting and protection. Other animals provided food, materials, and support for the household. During a winter storm, caring for them was not optional. Their survival was connected to human survival. You enter the stable area and feel the difference immediately. Compared with the cold stone corridors, this space feels more comfortable. The animals create warmth through their bodies, and the hay provides insulation from the frozen ground. The stable is not a bedroom, but on a freezing night, it offers a kind of shelter. Medieval people understood the importance of protecting valuable animals during harsh weather. A healthy horse could represent wealth, transportation, and military ability. Losing animals during winter could create serious difficulties for a household. The storm does not only threaten buildings, it threatens resources. You watch a stable worker check the animals one final time before resting. They make sure water is available. Bedding is arranged, and the animals are protected from drafts. The work is quiet and careful. The same patience used to maintain fires is used here. Preparation keeps life moving. A curious detail about medieval castles is that some animals live much closer to human spaces than they would in many modern homes. Dogs, especially, were often part of everyday castle life because they served practical roles while also providing companionship. A dog sleeping near a doorway could alert people to unusual activity. It could also provide warmth. It could simply be a familiar presence during a long night. You imagine a small dog resting near the edge of a room while snow falls outside. The animal hears sounds humans may ignore. Its world is shaped by smell, hearing, and instinct. The castle has many guardians. Some carry weapons. Some have 4 legs. You return your attention to the people caring for these animals. Their work reflects an important truth about medieval survival. People did not live separately from nature. They depended on relationships with animals, plants, weather, and landscapes. The natural world was not something outside the castle walls. It was part of daily existence. Historians know that medieval household invested significant effort into animal care, but historians still debate the exact living arrangements of animals inside different castles because conditions varied greatly. Some fortresses had extensive facilities, while smaller ones had much simpler arrangements. Not every castle looked the same. Not every winter night felt the same. Yet the connection between people and animals remained important. You hear the storm again as wind moves around the stable walls. The animals respond quietly. A horse moves slightly. A dog lifts its head. Then everything settles again. There is something peaceful about this moment. The castle sleeps. The animals rest. The storm continues. Life continues. You notice the smell of fresh hay mixed with the colder scent of snow entering through small openings. The warmth here feels different from the warmth of a fireplace. It is natural. It comes from living bodies, thick coverings, and careful preparation. Medieval people used every source of comfort available. Fire, clothing, shelter, animals, community. Nothing was wasted. You think about how different the castle would feel without these creatures. The halls would be quieter. The workers would have fewer resources. Travel would become harder. The daily rhythm of life would change completely. Animals were not background details. They were part of the story. You walk back toward the main rooms and hear the sounds of the sleeping fortress again. The contrast between areas is striking. The noble chambers are quiet and private. The servant rooms are crowded and practical. The stables are warm and alive. Every part of the castle has its own nighttime atmosphere. Every space tells a different story. The people inside the fortress may dream while they sleep, but the animals remain connected to the rhythm of the night. They sense the weather. They react to sounds. They share the same struggle against winter. The blizzard continues outside. Snow covers the fields. The towers stand beneath the frozen ski. But inside the castle, humans and animals create a small world of warmth. You leave the stable behind and return to the stone corridors. The air feels colder again, but the memory of the warmth remains. A medieval winter night was difficult. It was demanding. It required constant attention, yet it was also filled with cooperation between many forms of life. People did not survive the storm alone. They survived together. The night has grown deeper, and you follow the quiet path back toward the heart of the castle. The sounds of animals fade behind you, replaced by the softer noises of sleeping rooms and dying fireplaces. But before the castle can truly rest, there is one more important part of the evening to understand: food. Warmth did not come only from fires and blankets. It also came from what people ate and drank before facing a long winter night. You enter the kitchen area again and notice how different it feels now. Earlier, this place was full of movement. Pots were boiling, workers were preparing meals, fires burned strongly. Now, the activity has slowed. But traces of the evening remain. The smell of cooked food still lingers in the air. Smoke hangs above the fireplace. Wooden tables wait quietly until morning. A medieval kitchen was one of the most important places inside a castle, especially during winter. Food preparation was not only about hunger, it was about maintaining energy, storing supplies, and helping people endure difficult conditions. A cold night required preparation before sleep. You imagine the final meal of the evening being served hours earlier. People gather according to their roles and status. The noble household receives different foods from servants and workers, reflecting the social structure of medieval life. Meals were connected to position. They showed wealth, they showed resources, they showed access. A wealthy household might have access to more variety, including better cuts of meat, imported ingredients, or larger portions. Ordinary workers depended more heavily on basic foods that provided reliable energy. Yet everyone shared the same purpose: to continue. You look at the stored supplies around the kitchen. Barrels, containers, and sacks represent months of planning. During winter, a castle could not depend on daily travel for every need. Food had to be preserved and protected. Medieval households relied on stored grains, salted foods, dried ingredients, and other supplies that could survive long periods. Preparation was survival. The winter storm outside makes this even clearer. If roads are covered in snow, if travel becomes dangerous, and if nearby farms cannot be reached easily, the castle depends on what has already been gathered. The people inside are living from earlier decisions. You notice a servant pouring a warm drink near the remaining fire. The exact drinks available depended on location and social status. But warm beverages and prepared foods could provide comfort during cold evenings. A simple warm drink could feel special after spending hours in freezing conditions. The body remembers warmth, the mind remembers comfort. You imagine someone holding a wooden cup with both hands, feeling the heat through the material. The steam rises slowly. The storm continues outside, but for a few moments, attention turns away from the cold. Small comforts matter. Historians know medieval diets varied greatly across regions and social groups. However, historians still debate how common certain evening meals were among different classes, because surviving records often describe wealthy households more clearly than ordinary workers. The everyday meals of many castle residents remain partly hidden, but we can understand the general pattern. Food supported work. Food supported warmth. Food supported survival. You walk toward the storage rooms and hear the quiet sounds of the castle around you. Someone moves above. A fire burns nearby. The wind continues beyond the walls. The supplies stored here are more than objects. They represent security. A full storage room meant confidence during uncertain weather. A protected food supply meant people could sleep without immediate worry. A prepared household could face the storm. A curious detail about medieval storage is that castles often used cool, protected areas to preserve certain foods because stable temperatures helped keep supplies usable. These spaces were practical solutions created long before modern refrigeration. The medieval world required careful observation. People learned from their surroundings. They understood seasons. They understood materials. They understood patience. You return to the kitchen fire and watch the final embers glow. The warmth feels inviting, but the castle is already entering its resting phase. The workers who prepared the food have finally completed their tasks. Their reward is simple: a place to sleep, a moment of quiet. A few hours away from responsibility, the connection between food and sleep becomes clear. A person cannot rest comfortably when they are hungry or exhausted from cold. The evening meal was part of preparing the body for the night ahead. Winter demanded more energy. The body needed fuel. The fire needed fuel. The entire castle depended on careful management of limited resources. You leave the kitchen and return to the darker corridors. The smell of food slowly disappears behind you. The sounds become softer again. The castle is settling. The storm is still there. The night is still long. But inside the fortress, people have completed another important step towards survival. they have eaten. They have prepared. They have created enough comfort to return. You think about the many people involved in this simple process: farmers growing crops, workers preserving supplies, servants preparing meals, cooks managing fires, everyone connected through a chain of effort. A winter night inside a medieval castle was never created by one person. It was created by many. And as you continue through the quiet halls, the last warmth of the kitchen follows you for a moment before disappearing into the cold stone darkness. The castle has become quieter now, but the night reveals problems that warmth and preparation cannot completely remove. You walk through the sleeping corridors and begin noticing the less comfortable realities hidden behind the beauty of medieval stone walls. A castle can be impressive. A castle can be powerful. A castle can also be cold, damp, and difficult. The people living here understand this better than anyone. You pass through a narrow passage where the air feels heavier. The stone walls are cool beneath your hand, and the smell of moisture mixes with smoke from nearby fires. The torchlight moves across uneven surfaces, revealing the marks left by centuries of weather and human activity. Winter finds every weakness. The storm outside pushes against the fortress, but the challenges inside are quieter. A small draft beneath a door, a damp corner near a wall, smoke collecting in a room. These details shape the experience of sleeping in a medieval castle. You enter a chamber where someone has already settled for the night. The fire is burning, but the room is not completely warm. The heat reaches some areas more easily than others. A person near the fireplace feels a different night than someone resting near the edge of the room. Comfort has boundaries. The medieval world was full of compromises. People made the best choices available. You notice a blanket being adjusted. A person pulls the wool closer around their shoulders. Another places extra clothing beneath their body to create more separation from the cold surface. Small adjustments create small improvements. That was how people survived. Medieval sleeping conditions were influenced by many factors, including weather, building design, available materials, and social position. Wealth could provide more protection, but even wealthy households faced problems that modern people rarely experience. Cold was one problem. Moisture was another. Stone buildings were excellent for defense, but they could also hold dampness during winter. Wet conditions made rooms feel colder and created additional challenges for keeping clothing, bedding, and supplies in good condition. You walk near the outer wall and feel the difference immediately. The stone seems to release the cold it collected during the day. The castle protects people from the storm, but the winter remains present. The walls remember the season. You hear water dripping somewhere nearby. Perhaps melting snow has found a small path through the structure. Perhaps moisture has gathered in a hidden corner. Medieval buildings required constant maintenance because weather was always testing them. A castle was never finished. It needed care. It needed repair. It needed attention. Historians still debate how comfortable medieval castles actually were during severe winters because written descriptions often focus on important events rather than everyday living conditions. Archaeological evidence provides clues, but the daily experience of ordinary residents remains difficult to fully reconstruct. The past leaves behind pieces. People must connect them carefully. You continue through the sleeping areas and notice another challenge. Smoke. Fire provides warmth, but it also creates problems. Medieval fireplaces could produce smoke, especially when ventilation was limited or fuel quality was poor. The same fire that protected people from cold could also affect the air they breathed. Warmth came with a price. This balance appears everywhere in medieval life. A thick blanket provides comfort but may feel heavy. A large fire provides heat but creates smoke. A crowded room provides shared warmth but reduces privacy. Every choice has advantages and disadvantages. You imagine a person lying awake briefly during the night. They listen to the storm. They adjust their blanket. They move closer to warmth. They wait for the uncomfortable moment to pass. Then they sleep again. Humans are remarkably adaptable. A curious detail about medieval households is that People often accepted conditions that would feel unusual today because those conditions were normal parts of life. Shared sleeping spaces, limited privacy, and changing temperatures were common experiences for many communities. People did not compare their homes with a modern expectation. They compared them with what came before. A dry room was better than an exposed shelter. A castle wall was better than the open landscape. A warm fire was better than the winter wind. You return toward the centre of the castle, where the atmosphere becomes slightly warmer. The sounds of the sleeping residents surround you again. The storm continues, but the fortress continues too. The problems remain. The solutions remain. People keep adapting. You begin to understand that the story of medieval sleep is not a story about perfect comfort. It is a story about finding peace within imperfect conditions. A person in 1378 did not need a room without floors. They needed a roof that allowed them to rest. They needed protection from the worst parts of winter. They needed enough warmth to recover strength. They needed hope that morning would arrive. The fire continues glowing. The blankets remain wrapped. The castle remains standing. Outside, the blizzard covers the fields and towers with snow. Inside, people accept the night as they have accepted many nights before. The stone is cold. The air is imperfect. The comfort is limited, but sleep still arrives. And within that simple act of resting beneath ancient walls, you discover something familiar across centuries. People have always searched for the same things at the end of the day: safety, warmth, quiet, a place where they can finally close their eyes. The storm continues beyond the castle walls, but inside the fortress, the deepest hours of the night bring a different kind of activity. The fires burn lower, the footsteps become fewer, the voices become softer. You move through the darker corridors and notice something that has shaped medieval life as much as weather or architecture: faith. For many people living in 1378, the night was not only a physical experience, it was also a moment filled with reflection, prayer, and traditions passed through generations. Darkness created space for thoughts about safety, uncertainty, and the mysteries of life. You enter a small, quiet area near a chapel inside the castle. The air feels different here. The smell of candle wax replaces some of the smoke from fireplaces. The sound of the storm becomes distant behind thick walls. The flickering light creates gentle shadows across stone surfaces. The atmosphere feels peaceful. For many medieval people, faith was woven into everyday routines. It influenced how they understood seasons, illness, hardship, and survival. A difficult winter night was not only a challenge of cold and weather, it was also a moment when people searched for comfort and meaning. You imagine someone finishing their evening duties and taking a few moments before sleep. They may pause quietly, they may offer a prayer for protection, they may think about family members, the future, or the challenges waiting after sunrise. These moments were deeply personal. The castle was not only a military structure, it was also a place where people experienced ordinary human emotions: fear, hope, gratitude, uncertainty. You walk slowly through the chapel space and notice the peaceful contrast with the storm outside. The wind still moves around the towers, snow still covers the ground, yet within this small room there is a feeling of stillness. The medieval world often connected the natural environment with spiritual ideas. Seasons, storms, and the changing sky were part of a larger understanding of the world. Winter was not simply a temperature, it was a season with meaning. Tuning. A time of endurance, a time of patience, a time of waiting. The people inside the castle knew that winter would eventually pass. Morning would return, the fields would change, the snow would disappear. This belief created comfort during difficult nights. You return to the sleeping areas and notice how these traditions followed people even into rest. Before going to sleep, many medieval individuals practiced small rituals that helped them feel prepared for the night. The exact habits varied depending on region, social group, and personal belief. Some traditions are well recorded, while others remain uncertain because ordinary people left fewer written descriptions. Historians still debate how common specific nighttime religious practices were among medieval households because surviving sources often come from religious communities or wealthy families. The private routines of everyday castle workers remain much harder to see, but the presence of faith in medieval society is clear. It shaped daily life. It shaped celebrations. It shaped how people faced hardship. You hear a quiet sound from one of the nearby rooms. Someone wakes briefly and checks the fire. Someone else adjusts a blanket. The castle continues its nighttime rhythm. Even during moments of rest, people remain connected to their surroundings. The storm, the fire, the walls, their beliefs. A curious detail about medieval castles is that chapels were often included within important residences because spiritual life was considered essential for noble households and communities. These spaces were not only places of ceremony, they were also reminders of routine and stability in a world where weather, illness, and uncertainty were constant concerns. Routines created comfort. The same person who worried about a winter storm could also find peace in familiar traditions. You return toward the Great Hall and see the remaining glow from the fireplace. The room feels different now compared with earlier. It is no longer a place of conversation and activity. It feels almost sacred. People are sleeping. The fire is quiet. The storm continues. You think about how every person inside the castle carries their own private experience of this night. A guard may pray for safety during their watch. A servant may hope for rest after a long day. A child may feel comfort knowing family is nearby. Everyone faces the same storm differently. Everyone searches for reassurance. You look toward the dark windows and imagine the snow-covered world outside. The castle stands surrounded by uncertainty, but inside there is order. There are routines. There are traditions. There are small moments that remind people they are not alone. The night becomes less about fear. It becomes about endurance. The people of 1378 did not know what future historians would say about their lives. They did not know their sleeping habits would one day become a subject of curiosity. They were simply living through another winter night. A night of cold. A night of work. A night of waiting. And like countless generations before them, they searched for comfort wherever they could find it. In a warm fire. In a familiar voice. In a quiet prayer, in the simple knowledge that others were nearby. The castle walls continue holding back the storm. The candles continue burning softly. The sleepers continue resting beneath their coverings. And as the night moves slowly toward morning, the fortress remains filled with something stronger than warmth alone. It remains filled with human resilience. The night slowly moves forward, and you leave the quiet chapel behind as you wander toward another part of the castle. The storm still covers the outside world, but inside the fortress, a different story is unfolding. This time, you notice the smallest residents of the castle, the children. Their experience of a winter night in 1378 is different from the adults around them. They live among the same stone walls, hear the same storm, and feel the same cold air. But they understand the castle through a different kind of imagination. You enter a smaller chamber where a family rests together. The room is not completely silent. There are soft voices, gentle movements, and the occasional sound of someone waking briefly before returning to sleep. The fire is lower now. The blankets are gathered closely. The night feels long. Children in medieval castles were surrounded by a world shaped by family, work, tradition, and survival. They did not experience childhood exactly as modern people do, because daily life required children to become familiar with responsibilities earlier. Yet they were still children. They played. They learned. They listened to stories. They searched for comfort. You imagine a child lying beneath a wool covering, listening to the storm outside. The wind sounds enormous against the castle walls. Every crack of wood and movement of the building becomes part of the nighttime experience. A parent may offer reassurance. A sibling may provide company. A familiar voice may make the darkness feel smaller. The cold remains, but fear becomes easier to manage when people are together. Family was one of the greatest sources of warmth inside medieval homes. You notice the sleeping arrangement in the chamber. Unlike the private rooms of wealthy adults, children often slept near other family members or household attendants. Shared spaces were common, and sleeping close together provided both practical warmth and emotional security. A room full of people felt safer. It felt less lonely. The medieval night was rarely experienced completely alone. Historians know that children in medieval societies participated in family and household life from a young age, but historians still debate many details about childhood experiences because evidence from ordinary children is limited. Most written records focus on adults, especially those with wealth or power. The voices of medieval children are among the quietest in history. You pause beside the doorway and imagine the small details of this room. Wooden objects resting nearby. Simple clothing prepared for morning. A few personal items belonging to the family. Nothing extravagant. But everything has meaning. A handmade toy. A favourite blanket. A familiar corner. A place remembered. A curious detail about medieval childhood is that some children learned through observation and participation rather than formal instruction alone. They absorbed knowledge by watching adults work, helping with small tasks, and becoming familiar with the rhythms of household life. The castle itself was a teacher. Every room offered lessons. The kitchen taught preparation. The stable taught responsibility. The halls taught movement and tradition. The winter night taught patience. You hear the storm again through the walls. The child notices it too. Perhaps they wonder how much snow has fallen. Perhaps they imagine the castle surrounded by endless white fields. Perhaps the sound becomes part of a memory that remains long after the storm disappears. Winter nights often create powerful memories. The darkness makes ordinary moments feel larger. The warmth feels more valuable. The presence of family feels stronger. You think about how children experience the castle differently from adults. To an adult, the fortress may represent duty, defense, and responsibility. To a child, it may feel like an enormous world filled with hidden passages, stories, and mysteries. The same stone walls create different meanings. A guard sees a place to protect. A servant sees a place to maintain. A child sees a place to explore. You move through the corridor and imagine children waking briefly during the night. They may hear footsteps from guards. They may see candlelight passing beneath a door. They may hear animals moving below. The castle never fully disappears into silence. Life continues around them. This constant movement may have been comforting. A completely silent building could feel strange. The familiar sounds of family, workers, and guards created a sense of security. Everyone had a place. Everyone belonged to the rhythm of the fortress. You return to the sleeping chamber and notice the gentle warmth created by shared presence. The fire provides some heat, but people provide another kind. Companionship, the ability to know someone else is nearby. The knowledge that the storm is faced together. This may have been one of the greatest comforts of medieval winter nights. Not perfect warmth, not perfect protection. Connection. The child slowly falls deeper into sleep. The storm becomes quieter in their imagination. The voices around them become softer. The castle continues standing through the night. Outside, snow covers the fields. Inside, a family rests beneath stone walls. The world of 1378 may seem distant, but this moment feels familiar. Across centuries, children have listened to storms, searched for comfort, and found peace in the presence of those they love. The blankets are pulled closer. The fire continues glowing. The night continues passing. And within this medieval castle, Even the youngest residents discover the simple truth that has guided humanity through countless winters. A difficult night becomes easier when it is shared. The storm has lasted for many hours now, and the castle stands beneath a blanket of snow. You walk once more through the quiet halls, but your attention turns beyond this single night. Winter storms were not only moments of discomfort. They could shape entire communities. They could influence decisions. They could change the way people built, travelled, worked, and survived. You look through a narrow window and see the frozen landscape surrounding the castle. The fields are hidden beneath white snow. Roads have disappeared. The distant villages are quiet. The world outside feels paused. A medieval winter could create isolation. Inside the castle, people understood this reality. A fortress was not only built to resist human enemies, it was also designed to help communities endure difficult seasons. The walls, storage areas, fireplaces, and protected spaces all became more important when nature became unpredictable. The castle was a refuge. You imagine the months before this storm arrived. Workers would have prepared supplies, farmers would have gathered harvests, servants would have organised storage areas, builders and craftspeople would have repaired damaged sections of the fortress. Winter survival began long before the first snow. Preparation was the hidden story behind every comfortable night. Medieval societies depended heavily on seasonal cycles. The arrival of winter affected farming, travel, trade, and daily routines. A harsh season could create serious challenges, especially when cold weather lasted longer than expected. A single storm was temporary. A difficult winter could change everything. You walk past the storage areas again and notice how important they are. The supplies inside represent security. Grain, preserved foods, firewood, and other materials allow the castle to continue functioning when the outside world becomes harder to reach. The people sleeping peacefully tonight depend on decisions made months earlier. The past prepares the present. You hear the wind moving around the towers and think about how weather shaped medieval architecture. Castles were designed for defense, but their structures also reflected the need for protection from the environment. Thick walls reduced exposure. Inner rooms provided shelter. Courtyards created organised spaces. Storage areas protected essential supplies. Every feature had a purpose. Historians know that medieval castles changed over time because of military needs, technology, and living conditions. However, historians still debate how much specific architectural choices were intended for winter comfort, because many castles were designed primarily around defence rather than climate control. A fortress was not a modern winter home. It was a compromise. You continue through the halls and imagine the generations of people who experienced similar nights. Different families, different servants, different guards, different storms. Yet many challenges remain the same. Cold, darkness, uncertainty, the need for cooperation. A curious detail about medieval weather history is that unusually severe winters could affect food supplies and travel routes, sometimes creating wider social problems beyond individual households. Weather was not simply a background detail. It was a force that shaped human decisions. You return to the Great Hall and look at the sleeping figures around the fading fire. They are not thinking about history. They are not thinking about future generations studying their lives. They are simply resting. But their ordinary actions reveal something important. History is often created through everyday survival. A person carrying wood, a family sharing warmth, a guard walking through snow, a worker repairing a blanket. These moments rarely appear in grand stories, but they are the foundation of human experience. You sit quietly near the fire and consider how different this night would feel without the castle. The people outside would face stronger winds, deeper cold, and fewer protections. The fortress does not make winter disappear. It creates a place where people can endure it. The storm becomes part of the castle's identity. Every generation remembers difficult winters. Every community develops traditions around survival. Every home finds its own ways to create warmth. The medieval castle is one example of a much larger human story. You notice the fire has become smaller. The night is slowly approaching its final hours. The storm remains strong, but it no longer feels as overwhelming as before. Perhaps because you have learned its rhythm. The wind has become familiar. The darkness has become familiar. The cold has become something people know how to face. Humans adapt through repetition. A difficult night becomes a remembered night. A remembered night becomes experience. Experience becomes knowledge passed forward. You think about the people who lived here and wonder what stories they told after storms ended. Perhaps they remembered the strength of the wind. Perhaps they laughed about the cold. Perhaps they were simply grateful for a warm meal and a safe room. Winter creates stories, not always dramatic ones, sometimes quiet ones. A warm fire after a freezing day, a family gathering close together, a morning when the snow finally stops. These are the moments that remain. You look again toward the window. The blizzard has covered the landscape, but the castle still stands. The walls remain strong, the fires remain alive, the people remain together. The storm has tested them. It has not defeated them. And as you continue through the sleeping fortress, you realize that the greatest achievement of a medieval castle was not only surviving battles, it was surviving ordinary hardships, the cold nights, the long winters, the endless waiting for spring. The castle was a place where people learned to endure, and beneath the snow-covered towers of 1378, another winter night slowly moves toward morning. The night begins to soften. The storm outside is still present, but its power has changed. The wind no longer feels like a sudden attack. It has become a constant companion moving around the ancient castle walls. You walk through the quietest corridors now, where almost everyone has found a place to rest. The castle has entered a rare moment of stillness. Not complete silence, but peace. You notice how different the fortress feels during these final hours before dawn. The fires are smaller, the candles are shorter. The sounds of movement have almost disappeared. Even the guards seem to walk more slowly as they continue their duties. The long winter night is reaching its deepest calm. You stop near a window and look outside. The snow continues falling gently across the courtyard. Earlier, the blizzard felt powerful and overwhelming. Now, the snowfall creates a softer scene. The same storm can feel different with time. The same night can change. You return through the halls and think about all the people sleeping around you. They are not experiencing the same night. Each person has their own corner, their own thoughts, and their own relationship with the cold. A noble person sleeps behind curtains. A servant rests near others. A guard remains awake. A child dreams beside family. The castle holds in many different lives at once. This is what makes the medieval fortress so fascinating. It is not only a building, it is a collection of human experiences connected by stone walls. You hear a quiet sound from the great hall. Someone moves slightly beneath a blanket. The fire has weakened, and a small adjustment is needed. A person wakes just long enough to restore comfort before returning to sleep. Even rest requires attention. Medieval life was full of small responsibilities. You notice the smell of the room has changed again. The strong scent of burning wood is softer now. The air carries the smell of cooled ashes, wool, and old timber. It is the smell of a place that has been lived in for many years. The castle has its own memory. Every room carries traces of previous nights. Every wall has witnessed countless moments of rest, worry, celebration, and hardship. A curious detail about medieval homes is that people often develop strong connections with familiar spaces because they spent much more time within their immediate surroundings. A castle resident could know every hallway, every doorway, and every sound produced by the building. Familiarity created comfort. You walk along the corridor and recognize how important that familiarity was during a storm. The castle may be cold, but it is known. The noises are expected. The shadows are familiar. The rooms have names and purposes. The unknown exists outside the walls. Inside, People understand their world. Historians still debate how medieval people emotionally experienced long winter nights because personal writings from ordinary residents are limited. Some sources reveal practical routines, but private feelings about loneliness, comfort, and fear remain difficult to measure. The quiet moments are the hardest to recover. You imagine those hidden thoughts. Someone remembering a summer field. Someone hoping for clearer roads tomorrow. Someone feeling grateful for the warmth of another person nearby. The human mind travels even when the body rests. You move toward the tower stairs and feel the cold return slightly. The higher areas of the castle remain exposed to the winter air. The wind presses against the stone, but the structure remains firm. From here, the fortress feels almost like a sleeping creature. The towers rise into the darkness. The walls surround the community. The fires glow like small hearts. The castle is not alive in the way people are alive, but it feels shaped by the lives that fill it. A strange little truth about medieval castles is that many sounds people considered normal would feel unusual today. The movement of animals, the burning of wood, the ringing of bells, and the footsteps of servants were all ordinary parts of nighttime life. The medieval night was never empty. It was simply different. You return to the warmer inner rooms and feel the atmosphere becoming gentler. The storm is still outside, but it no longer dominates every thought. The castle has adapted. The people have adapted. The night has become manageable. This may be the greatest lesson from the Winter Castle. Survival is rarely one dramatic moment. It's a series of small decisions repeated again and again. Gathering wood, preparing food, repairing clothing, sharing warmth, protecting others, finding rest. These simple actions allowed people to endure seasons that could be unforgiving. You sit near the remaining embers and watch the faint glow beneath the ash. The fire is almost finished, but it has done its work. It has provided warmth through the darkest hours. Soon morning will arrive. The castle will wake. Workers will return to their tasks. The halls will fill with movement again. But for now, there is only this quiet moment. A medieval fortress beneath a winter sky. A community resting together. A storm slowly, Mustang. You listen carefully one final time during the deepest hours of night. The wind moves gently around the towers. The fire makes a soft sound somewhere nearby. Someone breathes peacefully beneath a blanket. The world outside remains cold. The world inside remains warm enough. And as you stand among the ancient stones of 1378, you understand that the quietest hours of the night were not empty. They were filled with resilience. They were filled with patience. They were filled with ordinary people finding peace inside an extraordinary place. The first signs of morning are beginning to appear, although the castle is not fully awakened yet. You remain inside the quiet fortress as the final hours of darkness slowly disappear. The storm has weakened. The wind is softer. The night is almost finished. You walk toward a narrow window and look outside. The landscape has changed completely. The snow covers everything, creating a bright white blanket across fields, paths, and rooftops. The world that was hidden beneath darkness is now visible again. A winter morning has arrived. But the castle is not finished with the work. A new day begins with the same responsibilities that existed before the storm. You hear the first movements inside the fortress. A door opens quietly. Footsteps appear on the stone floors. A fire is carefully rebuilt after burning through the night. Servants begin preparing for another day. The castle wakes slowly. It does not suddenly become busy. It gradually returns to life. You follow the first workers moving through the halls. Their clothing is still heavy from the cold. Their hands move carefully as they begin familiar tasks. The storm may have ended, but the effects remain. Snow must be cleared. Supplies must be checked. Animals must be cared for. The day begins with recovery. Medieval communities understood that surviving weather was only the first step. After a difficult night, people needed to repair, organize, and prepare for what came next. A storm leaves evidence. You notice snow gathered against doors and along walkways. The courtyard looks beautiful, but beauty does not remove the practical problems. Movement becomes harder, travel becomes slower, work requires more effort. Winter always asks something from people. You enter the kitchen and see the first signs of activity returning. Fires are growing stronger again. The smell of fresh cooking begins replacing the quiet scent of ashes from the night before. The castle is breathing again. People need food. People need warmth. People need routine. The morning meal becomes another important part of restoring energy after a difficult night. Workers prepare themselves for the tasks ahead. Guards finish their duties and finally seek rest. Families begin their daily activities. Everyone has survived another night. You think about the people who slept inside this fortress. Some had comfortable rooms, some had simple spaces, some barely noticed the storm because they were protected by their responsibilities and routines. Others felt every cold moment, yet all of them experienced the same morning. The storm created a shared memory. Historians know that severe weather influenced medieval communities many ways, affecting agriculture, transportation, and local economies. However, historians still debate the exact impact of individual storms on specific castles because detailed weather records from ordinary medieval communities are often incomplete. The past leaves traces, but many individual mornings remain unknown. You imagine this one. A servant opening a wooden door and discovering deeper snow than expected. A child looking outside with curiosity. A guard finally removing cold equipment after a long watch. A noble person hearing reports about the storm's effects. Different reactions. One morning, a curious detail about medieval winter routines is that people often used daylight carefully because artificial lighting was limited and expensive compared with modern standards. The return of morning light was not only a change in time, it was a valuable resource. Daylight meant movement. Daylight meant work. Daylight meant easier travel and safer activity. You walk through the castle as sunlight begins entering through narrow openings. The stone walls that felt dark and cold during the night now appear different. The same fortress that seemed mysterious after sunset becomes practical and familiar again. Night changes how we see places. Morning restores them. The great hall begins filling with activity. The sleeping spaces disappear beneath the return of daily life. Blankets are folded, fires are strengthened, tables are prepared. The room that sheltered people during the storm becomes a place of work again. This cycle repeats endlessly. Day becomes night. Work becomes rest. Storm becomes more memory. You stand near the fireplace where the final embers from the night remain. The warmth is stronger now. More wood is added. The flame rises again. The castle has survived. Not because the storm was weak, not because the walls defeated winter, because people worked together. The morning reveals something important about the night before. The castle was never truly protected by stone alone. The walls created shelter, but human effort created survival. Without the servants, the fires would fade. Without their hearts, the free would weaken. Without preparation, supplies would disappear. Without cooperation, the fortress would only be an empty structure. You look once more toward the snowy courtyard. The storm has transformed the landscape, but it has also created a moment of reflection. A winter night in 1378 may seem distant. The clothing is different. The buildings are different. The daily routines are different, but the feelings are familiar. The desire for warmth, the relief of morning, the comfort of surviving something difficult. These experiences connect people across centuries. You leave the window and return to the centre of the castle. The sounds of life grow stronger around you. The day has begun. The storm is no longer the main story. The people are. They endured the cold. They protected one another. They found rest within stone walls, and now they continue. Another day begins beneath the snowy towers of the medieval castle. The castle has awakened after the storm, but you remain for a little while longer inside the ancient walls. The snow outside has transformed the landscape, Yet the memory of the night remains in every corner of the fortress. You walk slowly through the halls where people rested only hours before. The same stones that felt cold and mysterious in darkness now sit quietly beneath the morning light. The fires burn brighter. The voices return. The castle has moved from survival back into ordinary life. But you remember the night. You remember the wind against the towers. You remember the quiet footsteps of guards. You remember the servants carrying wood and preparing warmth. You remember the people who closed their eyes while a blizzard surrounded them. A medieval castle was never truly comfortable by modern standards. It was not perfectly warm, it was not silent, it was not free from difficulties, yet it offered something incredibly valuable. Protection. A place to gather. A place to rest. A place to endure. You move toward the Great Hall one final time. The room has changed again. The sleeping spaces have disappeared. Tables are being prepared. Workers move through the area. The fireplace is alive with new flames. The hall has returned to its daytime purpose, but beneath the activity, you can still imagine the quiet night that passed here, the blankets arranged near the walls, the people resting close to warmth, the conversations that faded into sleep, the sounds of the storm outside. Every night leaves behind a story. The people of 1378 did not know they were creating a story that would survive centuries. They were not trying to become part of history. They were simply living according to the needs of their world. They prepared. They worked. They rested. They continued. You walk through the castle and think about how different people experienced the same winter night. A noble person may have remembered the warmth of a private chamber. A servant may have remembered the comfort of shared space. A guard may have remembered the endless hours of watching the walls. Each person carried a different memory, yet they all belonged to the same night. That is what makes ordinary history so fascinating. The greatest stories are not only found in battles, kings, and dramatic events, they are also found in quiet moments that happened again and again. A person lighting a fire, a family sharing a room, a worker repairing a blanket, a tired guard waiting for sunrise. These small actions built the daily world of the medieval past. Historians still argue about many details of medieval sleeping habits because ordinary people rarely left behind detailed descriptions of their private lives. We can study buildings, objects, and written records, but the exact feelings of someone lying beneath a blanket during a winter storm remain partly hidden. That mystery is part of the beauty. You're not only looking backward, you are imagining. You are connecting with people who lived, worked, worried, and dreamed beneath the same sky. A curious detail about medieval castles is that many features we now see as symbols of power were also connected to daily survival. Walls, storage rooms, fireplaces, and enclosed spaces were not only signs of wealth, they were tools. They helped communities face uncertainty. They allowed people to create a small place of order within a changing world. You step toward the castle entrance where the journey began. The wooden doors are open now. Fresh winter air enters the hall. The smell of snow mixes with smoke from the fires behind you. The storm has passed. The world outside is bright again. You look back one final time at the fortress. The towers rise above the snowy landscape. The walls remain strong. The people inside continue their routines. The castle is no longer fighting the night. It is simply living, and perhaps that is the most important lesson from this winter evening in 1378. Survival was not always about great victories or extraordinary achievements. Sometimes, survival was simply finding enough warmth, enough patience, and enough support to reach another morning. The people inside this castle knew something that every generation eventually learns. Winter passes. Storms end. Darkness fades. But the small moments of comfort created along the way are what people remember. You imagine the final hours of that medieval night once more. The last embers glowing beneath the ash. The quiet breathing of sleeping families. The steady footsteps of guards. The gentle movement of snow outside the walls. Then morning arrives, and everyone begins again. The castle remains behind you now, resting beneath the winter sky. The sounds grow softer, the fires become distant. The stone corridors disappear into memory. You leave with the feeling of a place that survived not through strength alone, but through cooperation, patience, and ordinary human care. The winter night is over. The castle sleeps no longer, but the story remains. As your journey fades, imagine the warm glow of a final fireplace, the soft sound of the winter wind beyond the walls, and the peaceful knowledge that another night has passed safely. Let the castle grow quiet in your thoughts. Let the snow-covered towers disappear slowly into the distance. Let the warmth remain, and as the ancient fortress fades away, allow yourself to rest peacefully, knowing that countless generations before you also searched for comfort beneath the darkness of night. Sweet dreams.